This is Tez on 10. I think we probably on about a 7. Let's go to 10 right quick. Hold on, sir. For somebody, since they said you intimidate voters, this ain't a good look.
You know, I don't want to get too raw with it.
Well, let's get raw with it. Are you with this or are you not with this? And I think if there's more conversation about the issue instead of Democrat, Republican, Democrat, I grew up with Bloods and Crips, so I know all about this gangbanging. So let's just go ahead and go all the way Tez on 10. They're afraid to have Democrats, Republicans, Trumpers, progressives all in the same room, but I'm not, because we need to have these conversations, so ain't nobody scared of nobody. This is the audience. This is where it's at. Y'all go get y'all wine and popcorn, because this is gonna be good. This is Tez on 10.
Hello, 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 hello. Hello, can I get some energy? Okay. I'm Tezlyn, Figaro, your host of Tez on 10. You guys saw the intro, so we can get right down to it. I want to thank my guests for being here. Gary Chambers on the left, Congressman Byron Donalds on the right. Y'all ready to get to it?
I'm ready.
Okay, let's get to it. Let's get straight to the bag, guys. We're going to get straight into the conversation. We want to deal with the economy first. Let's deal with the economy. Howard University, I don't know if you guys saw this, but they did a poll that talked about black swing state voters. The swing states, just in case no one knows, let me give you the swing states quickly. Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Georgia. Is Georgia in the house? Okay, you're one of the most important voters. So the poll found that although the majority of voters supported VP Harris, 18% of black men supported Trump because of his positions on the economy. Congressman Donalds, tell us why.
Because when he was president, the economy worked. We got to be honest about the facts. When he was president of the United States, our inflation rate was basically 2% throughout the entire time. Wages adjusted for inflation were rising. And that's the measure that really matters, wages adjusted for inflation. When you look at black unemployment, it was the lowest time at any point in American history to that point in time. When you look at the economy overall, it was growing across the board. The Trump tax cuts, which gets demonized a lot, actually added more revenue to the federal government than at any other point in the history of our country, adjusted for inflation. There was money coming back from overseas because companies were bringing that money back, and the way the entire tax policy was structured, it was actually moving into really only two categories. One, wages for workers. Two, being able to buy back stocks. That's the only two ways that money was being really invested. There was a third way, capital expenditures, but that was another point of his tax policy. Then you get to regulatory policy. When he came in, he cut about $1 trillion worth of harmful, in my view, regulations from the Federal Register that was slowing down small businesses in the United States. So when you put all that stuff together, it was one of the great points of economic growth in our country, and every demographic group took advantage of that, was rewarded with that economic growth. Everybody had a piece of that economic pie. So black men are looking back and they're saying, okay, we had the 4 years of Trump, we have the 4 years of Biden-Harris. Which one was better for my pockets? Which one was I excelling in more and more? And if you look at the economic data, it's not a doubt. It was under Donald J. Trump. And that's why you're seeing more and more black men saying, you know what? I'm gonna roll with Trump.
Counter, Gary.
I would just have to disagree because, pay attention, he said up until that point, it was the lowest unemployment rate. The lowest unemployment rate for black people was actually in 2023 under Joe Biden. Donald Trump inherited a strong economy from Barack Obama, number one, and he fumbled the bag. He had a strong economy, he got hit with COVID, and he fumbled the bag. So Biden gets in office with a pandemic, a financial catastrophe, and had to build it back up. What we look at is people who have a memory of the beginning of Donald Trump and not the end of Donald Trump. And government is like a ship. It turns slowly, not swift like a speedboat. And so the progress that we saw in the very beginning of his term, he just inherited that. So when we talk about the benefits of Trump, there really were none in the end. If you look at the judges he appointed and the things that they're rolling back and the injustices that are taking place as far as some of their rulings, you don't have to look at Roe v. Wade. You can look at black folks in South Louisiana cannot sue the chemical plants anymore for environmental racism. They can't get the job at the plant when the plant comes in. They're going to get the cancer from the plant, and because of Trump's judges, now they can't sue when they are harmed by those things. When you talk about what's going to benefit the economy in the long run, it's going to be things that like what Vice President Harris is talking about. 3 million new homes that she plans to build, $50,000 that she plans to give in tax credits to small business owners. Donald Trump only wants to give tax credits to the wealthy. That doesn't benefit working class, everyday, regular black people. I think that when we talk about these numbers, we need to also look at where are the strongest economies in the country and where are the most failing economies in the country. I'm from Louisiana, the 50th ranked state in the nation. If you want to see what Republican policies do, I invite you to visit us any day.
Counter. You got a counter?
Oh, I got a lot of things to counter there. First, number one, when Barack Obama left office, the economy was actually not growing. We were in a stagnant economy. And this is my career. I'm securities licensed. I worked in the business 17 years. The economy was actually growing only 1 to 1.5% per year when Donald Trump came into office. When he cut regulation and put in his tax policy, which, by the way, like I said before, grew the federal treasury, you lower tax rates, you actually get more tax revenue. That's an empirical fact. When he did that, mirrored with his put together with his regulation cuts, economic growth in the United States went from 1.5 under Barack Obama to 3.5 under Donald Trump. Those are the facts. That's the details. Number two, to what Kamala Harris wants to do. First and foremost, how's she going to build 3 million new homes? Has she actually told us how she's going to do that? Because she has not. Quite frankly, she hasn't told us much of anything, but I digress. Hold on, brother, I'm gonna come to that. Here's why. The same regulatory policy that the Biden-Harris administration has now put in across the board, including their environmental regulations, that slows down the ability to build new homes in the United States, and it increases the cost of building homes in the United States. And that's before I get to her economic policy. Number two, giving $25,000 to a first-time home buyer, that's only gonna make the cost of homes $25,000 more. Because every seller in the United States is gonna say, well, hold up, you a first-time home buyer? You got another $25,000 from the feds? Well, cool. Now my price of my home is now $25,000 more. It's actually not going to help the affordability crisis. Number three, her plan about wanting a $6,000 child tax credit. Well, a funny thing happened in the American Rescue Plan that Joe Biden signed into law in April, May of 2021. Kamala Harris was a deciding vote in the Senate on that plan. In that plan was the same tax credit policy. When that came to the House of Representatives, I was on the Budget Committee. When it came in, we said to them, this is gonna create inflation, because what you're doing is you're gonna give the child tax credit combined with state unemployment benefits, and that's gonna be more than the average prevailing wage across the states right now. So essentially, people are gonna stay at home. Why would you go to work in the middle of the second half of the pandemic when you're getting state unemployment and you're getting a child tax credit and you're making more money being in the house? That created a labor shortage in the United States, which created the inflation that's been crippling families. So, brother, I hear what you're saying, but the economic record is clear. If you're trying to generate economic growth, which is the thing that's going to allow small businesses to thrive, allow black people to thrive, Hispanic people, white people, etc., you have to have a low tax environment. You have to have a low regulatory environment. And she's not proven that she can build, frankly, anything. She's in charge right now of the broadband program that was in the Inflation Reduction Act. They've not added anybody under the Biden-Harris administration to rural broadband, even though they put $42 billion towards that program. So I'm looking at what she's done, not what she says. And what she says doesn't add up.
Okay.
I think that you said a whole lot of things to say a bunch of nothing in some ways, because you bring up these policies. Question for you, do you support raising the federal minimum wage?
No, I don't. I never have.
Okay, so when we talk about the policies that he's supporting, those policies support the wealthy. He doesn't support making regular, everyday people be able to earn a higher living, because he believes that the wages are going to trickle down because the people with the majority of the money are going to pour some money into your cup all of a sudden. It never happens. It never happens. When you look at the policies of Democrats versus Republicans, Democrats have created more jobs over the last 30 years under Democrat presidents than conservative presidents. 2.3 million jobs got lost under Donald Trump. And he's skipping over the last 2 years of Trump's presidency because you can't talk about the fumbled bag. You just can talk about what you thought was right in the first two 2 years of the presidency. If you had a leader who was wiser on the front side of the decisions, then we would not have had a crumbling economy and a healthcare crisis on our communities. The second part, did you vote for expanding Medicaid?
Well, actually, I was going to ask you a question because you asked me one, so now I was going to.
I gave you a little bit of time. I want to. This is my time. I want to follow up with that. Did you vote for expanding Medicaid, helping expand Medicaid, or did you vote for the $2,000 cap on prescription drugs this year?
The $2,000 cap, I believe that was in the American Rescue Plan.
Did you vote for it?
Well, no, because it created inflation.
Okay, that's my point.
You can't ask one question.
It's a yes or no. I just want to know, did you vote for it?
You can't ask one question.
Okay.
I want to know, did you vote for it? Because if you didn't vote for that, that's what benefits your grandmother and your grandfather, because now they don't have to pay over $2,000 a year for medical care costs. So when you talk about these things, talk about policies that actually impact working class people. The policies of Donald Trump benefit the wealthy, and those policies never trickle down to you. And just because a rich man's doing well doesn't mean you will.
Okay, County.
Okay, the talking points are cool, but let's get real. First and foremost, Seattle was the first city that went to a $15 minimum wage. I believe it was about 7 or 8 years ago. Do you know what happened to working people in the city of Seattle? Their hours were cut. Do you know why their hours were cut? Because the price per employee was so much higher that businesses had to start cutting back. People went from working 1 or 2 jobs to working 2 or 3 jobs in the city of Seattle. If you want to, hold on, Gary, now, I backed up. Now chill out for a minute now. Okay, now, if you want to go to the other thing about the minimum wage, if we want to have that economic conversation, another thing to understand, the prevailing wage, the prevailing market wage right now is significantly over the minimum wage. That's actually the real impact when you look at the minimum wage at any point in time over the last 50 years, that the market wage is always over the minimum wage. The minimum wage is a wage for entry-level employment. So if, my kids are 21, 17, 13, if they have to go work in a restaurant or work on a construction site or work in a hotel or doing something like that, and by the way, in construction, you make a lot more than the minimum wage. Let's establish that. But if you're going to do that, they don't have the skill set to be able to demand a higher wage. That was the original purpose.
$7.25 an hour,
That was the original purpose of the minimum wage. And so I will tell you, in the economic data, really over 50 years now has proven that the minimum wage is not really indicative of what people are making every single day. And actually, when you raise the minimum wage, what ends up happening is you start pricing out low-skilled labor. What's happened at Panera Bread? What's happened at Walmart? What's happened at Costco? What's happened at McDonald's? All these companies, well, when you push a higher wage, what they are starting to do is move towards automation. So now there's less people working in those stores. What does that do to people who are trying to find ways to make ends meet? It gives them less ability to find a job and less ability to put money in their pocket. So specifically to the minimum wage, one quick thing, Tez, I'm going to go quick on this one. When you want to talk about the American Rescue Plan, yes, they put a lot of things in that bill, like what you talked about with the out-of-pocket expense on prescription drugs. But let's be very clear. The American Rescue Plan is the bill that created the inflation that has been hurting every American, regardless of race, in the United States of America, except the rich. Who said that? Not me. Lawrence Summers, who was the economic advisor to Bill Clinton, because he came out when that bill came out and he said, do not do this. The economy doesn't need this stimulus. It's gonna cause inflation. Larry Summers was right. House Republicans were right. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden were wrong. So how are you going to entrust her with the economic future of our country when she's already damaged the last 4 years of purchasing power for the same people who need help today?
Okay, so I want you to counter that, Gary. Then I believe we'll have a question from the audience, and then we want to get to the next topic. I want to make sure both of you have time.
I don't want to go into the details of everything he said, but what I will say is that no American should be making $7.25 an hour anywhere in this country. And if you got a congressman who supports keeping the federal minimum wage at $7.25 an hour, I don't care if you're 15, 16, or 21, you can't afford to pay a light bill on working 40 hours a week at $7.25 an hour.
But let's be very clear. No American is making $7.25 an hour.
That's not true. I live in South Louisiana. I guarantee you I can find you somebody making $7.25 an hour.
Well, y'all heard that. Okay. Let's go to, I believe, is it James? Is that correct? Question in the audience from James on the economy. And let's stay focused on the economy. I believe he's in the back.
Hey, good afternoon. Again, my name is James R. Sanders, author of Reparations, Style, and Soul, and host of the Big Pay Black podcast. So, a few weeks ago, Tyrese incorrectly accused the Biden administration of not including the black community in legislation having to do with the Stop Asian Hate Bill. While the singer was ultimately incorrect, he was not alone in his perception. And while we all know perception is something that can ultimately swing a vote, is she doing a good enough job of separating her policies from the Biden administration previously with what she's doing now in campaigning? So is she doing a good enough job of separating her own policies from the Biden administration and what she did previously from 4 years ago?
You want to answer that quickly?
I think that the vice president has separated herself on some aspects of policy. I think that to run away from everything that happened under President Biden would be foolish in some ways, because everything that happened under President Biden wasn't bad. And I think that we need to be honest about that. We need to be honest about what he inherited and where we are today. Interest rates just got cut recently. Inflation is down at this point, and that's a response to the things that were inherited by Donald Trump. From Donald Trump. Second part is, I think that she's articulating policies in a more clear way than Donald Trump ever has. This man gets on stage and says he has concepts of a health care plan after he was president for 4 years. He's been out of office for another 4 years, and now he's running, and he still doesn't have a plan for what he's going to do to replace health care in the way that he says he's going to do. So when I talk about why I'm supporting the vice president, it's not actually because I'm thrilled about the individual as much as I am the policies that I believe that she's going to stand for that will benefit working class, regular people. And when you look at conservative policies, they failed working class, regular people, and specifically black people. I live in a city where black men make 50 cents on the dollar for every dollar that a white man makes. And that's in a city and a state that's ran with a Republican governor and a supermajority in the Republican legislature. If you let their cronies end up in the White House and in the Congress in charge, that is what America will face. You'll end up like Mississippi and Louisiana, and most of y'all moving from the South, not coming to it.
So is it the same as Biden? Is it still the same platform, or should she separate herself?
Well, first of all, to be honest with you, I don't think she's really separated herself from Joe Biden at all. She was the deciding vote for every major economic policy that went through that administration. She had to break those ties in the United States Senate, so she can't separate herself. Furthermore, she was sitting right there with him when they were going through everything when it came to immigration and border security, when it comes to foreign policy and all those policy sets. But I think it's bigger than that. In this environment, Kamala Harris, other than a couple of phrases that she has uttered or policies that just went up, a week ago, and there's really no details there, she hasn't articulated much of anything. Go look at the Oprah town hall. I didn't see her articulate a detailed economic vision or a detailed border security vision. When she sat with 3 journalists from NABJ, I believe one of which I've done an interview with that gentleman, Eugene Daniels, Eugene grilled me for an hour. They basically asked her 4 powder puff questions, no real detail. There's more detail in this debate between myself and Gary right now on stage. Kamala Harris hasn't done that. So in my view, she hasn't answered the call or answered the bell in detailing to the American people, what is she going to do differently than Joe Biden? All she's saying is, there's a new way forward, or I'm a new form of leadership. But the phrases and the personalities don't mean anything, because in 46 days, this election's gonna end. It ends in 44. 2 days after Election Day, all the phrases and personalities stop. But the policies are what's going to matter. She's not said really anything to that. I wish that she would, because it would be helpful to clarify this important decision for all Americans, no matter your personal politics. And the last thing I will say in terms of inheriting from Donald Trump, COVID-19 was something that was a disaster for every country in the world, including the United States of America. But what else did you inherit from Donald Trump? Inflation, when Joe Biden came into office with Kamala Harris, was at 1.4% year over year. Since Joe Biden and Kamala Harris took office, the price of inflation, the price of goods and services are well up over 20%. Go fix your car. It's well up over 50%. Get car insurance, well up over 50%. I just flew into Atlanta. I'm flying out of Atlanta to go back to DC. Airline tickets, well up over 30%. That's their economic policy. That was not happening in the United States when Donald Trump was president of the United States. And I will add in closing, because we talk about job numbers. When the economy was shut down because of COVID-19, of course, a lot of people lost their jobs. But what did Donald Trump do? Did he just sit in the White House and not lift a finger? No, he moved PPP funding for small business owners to be able to keep their businesses somewhat afloat through the pandemic. They moved additional assistance like tax credits and et cetera for people who are employees to be able to try to make ends meet and stay above sea level while the economy was shut down. So Joe Biden comes into office, they start reopening the economy, and then what happens? All those jobs come back. That's not because of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. That's because those jobs are going to come back regardless of whoever was president of the United States. And last thing I will say, the Biden-Harris administration just had to come out with a revision to their own employment statistics, and they had to remove 818,000 jobs that they had falsely reported to the American people,
Which is
and the
still more
unemployment
than
rate has
Trump.
been going up.
Okay,
With 818,000, it was still more than Donald Trump. With 818,000 jobs,
The pandemic shut down the economy.
Whatever the reasons are, the numbers are the numbers. And let's be clear,
If nobody's going to work,
a
how do you expect
Democrat
them to keep
Congress
jobs?
passed the PPP protections, not a Republican Congress. So when you talk about Donald Trump giving you PPP loans to bring us back out of the things that we were dealing with in COVID, it was a Democrat Congress that did so. It
Wasn't
was a
that a
Democrat
negotiation with
Congress,
Donald Trump to
but
make
who
that
was
happen?
writing the bill? The Democrats.
That's actually not how it works. The
It-
White
it's a-
House,
it's
the
a-
White
it's
House,
a
the
two-
White House
it's a
writes a
two-
lot of the bills that get passed and signed
So
into
you
law.
telling me
Don't
that
do
you
that,
don't write
Gary.
legislation, sir?
Gary, you ran for the U.S. Senate. You know how
So
this
you
works
telling me
like I
that you
do.
you don't write legislation as a congressman?
No, what I'm saying,
You're right, you
what
don't.
I'm saying is that when you get to the bills that move through both chambers of Congress and to a president's desk, there is a large negotiation that goes on with each chamber of Congress
Where does the bill
and
start,
the White
sir?
House. That's how it works.
Where does
Okay,
the bill
okay, so
start?
hold on.
Let's not
So hold-
schoolhouse rock. Where does a bill start?
Well, actually, it depends on the bill.
Where does the bill start, Congressman?
I'm trying to tell you, brother.
In the House.
Brother, that's actually not always true. If you're
The
dealing,
bill starts in the legislature by the people who write the bills.
brother, I'm
Senate
in
or
the
the House?
Congress 4 years. I was in the State House 4 years,
Okay,
brother.
so where
let me
does
tell
it
you.
start then? Just a quick, I
When
got
you-
another
I know,
question
I know.
I need y'all to have
I wanna-
2 minute
I wanna make
response.
sure this is
But just-
clear.
Yes, where
It's
does
a little
the bill
bit more than
start?
Schoolhouse
The
Rock.
president signs the bill. He don't
When
write it.
spending bills originate, spending and taxing bills originate in the House. Other legislative policies can either start in the Senate or the House.
Not
That's
the
how
president.
it works.
Right, but he's did say
Not the
House.
president.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the
president
president
does not write the
negotiates
bill.
everything.
So
Presidents
he
just don't
said
sign stuff that
he
comes
brought
from
up the
Congress.
PP
Y'all know
Yeah,
that.
but
Come
let's
on now,
okay,
let's not.
okay, but hold on, but let's be
Tezlyn, I
fair.
gotta
Hold on,
make
wait
this
a minute,
point.
wait. This is important. This is important, Congressman. This is important because we want to educate. We got a lot of people who are 18 to 25 may not understand schoolhouse rock, may know what y'all talking
They don't
about.
know what
Schoolhouse Rock.
So we want to be. So let's be clear about where a bill starts in the House. I understand the president can negotiate. I understand that a president can send something down and say, "Hey, I need you to write these bills," but we want to make sure that we're giving these young folks accurate information. So it starts in the House, correct?
A House or the Senate.
The House or the Senate?
Spending and taxing bills start in the House.
That's it.
But
That's
the-
all.
but the reason I want to say
but
that,
okay,
Tez,
go ahead.
is because
I got another question.
when you say that the president did these things as far as PPP, the Congress wrote those legislations
Right,
and
and-
passed that, and that was a Democrat Congress. Trump made them hold up the check so that they could put his signature on the check.
See, now
That's
here we
why
go.
you think that Trump did.
Gary,
it
the
for you.
last statement you made is politics, man. That's politics and personalities and talking points.
Hey.
It's not facts. It's not reality. Ladies and gentlemen, let me give you reality. There is nothing that's being signed by Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, etc., that is not negotiated with White House staff and congressional leadership. That's how it really works.
That's not what we said, though. What we said,
Gary, you
what
just trying to say that it was
what
only
you
Nancy
said is
Pelosi
that the
that did- that's
president
not
gave.
true. Come on
you
now.
said that Trump gave people PPP. The Democratic Congress gave people PPP, and Trump signed it.
Okay,
And
They
so I
both
think,
did.
so I
matters.
think
That
we got it.
matters.
So I think we got. So bottom line, Gary Chambers is saying it started in the House. Congressman Donald said it couldn't have
Controlled
happened
by
without Trump.
Democrats.
That's
Cannot
the bottom line.
happen without
So
the president.
We got it. So
Period.
let's go
Full
on
stop.
to the next.
I agree with that.
So let me get to this question. In education, which is important, do you believe that charter schools and voucher programs give minority students a better chance at a good education, or do they weaken public education and increase inequality? I'm gonna go to you, Gary, first on this one. Make
So
the case.
I think that every community should have good public schools, good quality public schools paid for by your tax dollars in your community. When you introduce a charter, you introduce a private entity that then has its own board, not elected by the people, to take resources from the public school system into a charter school system to educate children. Are there some good charters? Absolutely. I know of several good charters in Louisiana. They're mostly homegrown charters that are created by educators from those communities who really care about those kids and understand how to teach those kids. What I've seen, though, because I live in Louisiana, we have one of the worst education systems in the country. New Orleans is one of the only places in America that had an all-charter school district until this year. Right? For the last 20 years, New Orleans has had an all-charter school district. It has not produced quality education for the people of New Orleans. If you ask the people of New Orleans what would they prefer, they would prefer to give the control of their schools back to the school board that they vote for so that those resources can be there. When you take a kid out of the public school system and put them in the charter school, the money that's with that kid goes to that charter school. So when you look at your local school district not having the resources to do professional development for teachers or not having the resources to build new facilities or give quality training to people. They don't have that because the more charters you open, the less money that's in the pot for everybody else. I think we need a national moratorium on charters to hold them and do an evaluation to say, has this worked for America overall? And if they haven't, then we should ban them and we should go back in the direction. Because let me tell you, we only put charters in black and brown communities. They do not put charters in poor rural communities to fix the rural communities where those kids are struggling in school. Rural communities have struggling schools too, but they don't send big box charters to them. Why? Because they're going to say to those communities, I can tell you in Ascension Parish, Louisiana, which is right next to East Baton Rouge Parish, it's majority white. Those people there don't want charters. They have a majority Republican school board. They don't want charters in their community.
So quick question, when you said ban it, are you talking about on the federal level or do you think there should be something more on the state level?
I think we should not allow them, period. Donald Trump agrees with, wants to end the Department of Education. I think that there has to be a checks and balances because otherwise some of these governors and state boards of education will run rogue with our kids and their education.
Okay.
Well, a couple things. First, I believe that we should have an all-of-the-above approach. When I first got into the state legislature, I felt that the answer was charter schools only. I've actually moved away from that position.
When did you move away from that? Just so.
Probably around 2018, 2019.
Okay, what made you move away?
Because what you begin to realize is that it's not just about a charter school or a traditional public school or a private school or a parochial school. What you begin to understand is that you want to have an economy of education where parents are empowered to make those decisions on behalf of their child. I have 3 sons. They've all attended different schools. They all learn differently. They all have different ways of progressing through an institution, just like any other child in America. So I think what we really want to get to is a situation where, yes, parents, through a scholarship program, like some states are beginning to start, they are given the ability to pick and choose where they want to go with their child. If it's the local traditional public school, then that's fine. That's the decision of the parent, examining their child and what their child needs most. If it's a private school, so be it. If it's a charter school, so be it. When you have a situation when you have multiple schools having to compete for those children, it actually raises the game of all those different schools for the children. It's much more of an economic principle that we see in so many other parts of our economy when people's purchasing power creates better product overall. I think when you talk about rural America, Gary brought it up, and this is important. One of the reasons why you don't see a lot of your corporate charters, your big box charters, go into rural communities is because there's just not enough students in a compact area where it actually makes sense to put a school there. How are you going to bus schools from a 30-mile radius, 40-mile radius, 50-mile radius when there's already a competing traditional public school in that area? It doesn't really work. I think that in the economy where we're at today, where it's based upon information, you got to have a free-flowing ability for children to get the absolute best that they need of what's available to them. And that's not to diminish public schools per se. I think that with traditional public schools, the issue is that it has been so dominant for so long, it has been in the mud in terms of the true innovation that is necessary for public schools to meet the needs of these kids, and the public school's not going to meet the need of every kid.
Quick question for you, Congressman. Do you support Donald Trump's position on getting rid of the Department of Education? And if so, why?
Oh, I do, and it's empirical data. Since the Department of Education was created in, I believe it was 1977, since it was created, the academic rates of mathematical attainment at 4th grade and 8th grade and reading literacy at 4th grade and 8th grade has decreased for students in the United States of America. If the purpose of the Department of Education is to raise academic standards and academic rigor, but what we've seen actually is that mathematical standards have decreased over that time period. Why would we keep the same agency doing the same thing?
Who regulates it, though? I mean, who would regulate it?
Well, actually, what would happen is similar to a lot of public policy. It would actually go back to the primary domain of state governments. And I will add, state governments still have the primary domain over education in our country. The federal Department of Education does a handful of things. It provides Title I funding for low-income students across the United States, and a couple other facets. What ESSA was a big one that just came out maybe about 15, 20 years ago. Before that, it was No Child Left Behind by George W. Bush that came in early in his presidential administration. But the state departments of education are the ones that pass what curriculum standards are going to be, what testing standards are going to be, how textbooks are going to be ordered, what's going to be the actual documents and literature and wording and phrases that are going to be in those textbooks. They're the ones that deal with the licensing of teachers and what are going to be the standards of teachers to actually be employed within that state. State government actually has most of the control in education. But the Department of Education at the federal level has not proven by empirical data that it's actually been to the betterment of children in our country.
Okay, let's let Gary respond.
One of the things that I disagree with the congressman on when you talk about charters not going to rural America, if their objective and goal is to improve the quality of education of children, you're going to educate children everywhere. You're going to go to the rural America, you're going to go to the big cities, you're going to educate children because there are children there in a failing school, and you said you care about kids in failing schools, right? So if you care about kids in failing schools, why don't you care about kids in failing schools in rural America? You only care about kids in failing schools in the inner city because that's where the tax dollars and the tax base is there that they're going to let you screw their children. The reality is people in rural America are not going to let you bring charter schools into there. They're going to demand that their government gives them a good public education. When you take these kids out of that school and you put those kids in that school, what you end up doing is those resources that are there for that local school district are diminished. And he's right. A lot of this control is in the state and the local control of the school for schools. But your state board of education allocates a certain amount of money per kid. That goes into the local school district based on what school they go to. When you take the resources out of a local school district where the most levers for accountability exist for a parent, that's where the trouble comes, because you can't challenge the board at many of these charter schools. Now, I don't disagree that we should have innovation, that we should have new ideas in education, that we should find ways to create that and stimulate that within the psyche and the mentality of our country. I don't believe that this method has worked, and I think the proof of that is we're all discovering what is the path forward. Right? I think that was an answer that people presented at a time because there were issues in education around the country. But I think that when you look at it over the last 20 years, that it hasn't necessarily benefited us. The other thing is when you talk about vouchers, Arizona said one amount that they were going to put in the bank for a voucher program. That amount is ballooned beyond what they thought it was. Nobody knows how many people are going to opt into these voucher programs, number one. Number two, a lot of the people who are opting in are people who can afford to send their kids to private schools, but they end up getting the benefit of sending their kids to these private schools on your tax dollars, and regular people who live in these communities who actually need the vouchers aren't getting the access to them, and they usually don't have the means to transport their kids to all of these different places. So I just don't think that that's worked. I do think we need to figure out what is the path, and I think conservatives and liberals are wrestling with what that is, because if our children are not educated, we are failing as a society. And that is something that I think we can agree that we have to figure out what is that path. I don't think the current suggestions on the table are it. I think we need to figure out what does good public education look like and fix that in America for all of our children.
I'm gonna get to a question in the audience, but all of us have children, and I think I just want to point out this important fact when I'm having this debate. I believe in all of the above, just to put my position, to have the option. But when Gary pointed out that a lot of people don't even have the ability to drop your kid off, that was one of the things that I struggled with. There was no bus to get to the charter school. I wanted her to go to a charter school because the inner city that I was in was failing. So I put her in the charter school, but I also had to make sure that there was transportation to get her to charter school. And a lot of folks are working 1-2 jobs late. So that was an issue. Another concern that I had was when I took her and put her back into the public school, because there was nothing regulating between the two to make sure that she was on task. I'm thinking she's ahead of the game, ahead of the curve on the charter school, went back to the public school and ended up being behind because they taught math totally different in the public school system versus what she learned in the charter school. So quickly, in 1 minute, I want both of you to give how would that be regulated? In other words, are our children learning the same? Is there some inequality in that? And how do we make sure they stay on path in a 1 minute response? And I'll get to the question.
You raised a great question. I want to say very, very quickly, every state, they have their own funding formula for education. I can only speak to Florida. In Florida, there is a level funding formula, for every child across the board. Children who have special needs actually get more money in the funding formula. And so that's universal across our entire state. The difference is when you get down to the local level, the county level, the local millage rate that they collect from property taxes, that's the difference. And that's where you'll have one school district that seems to be more affluent or is more affluent. They seem to have more things, whereas in a poorer district, they have less. In Florida, we set it by counties. I don't want to speak to Louisiana. Maybe it's by parish. I don't know. But in Florida, it's done by county. So you can have schools in Collier County, and even within the county, sometimes that's not even level. So those are some of the things on the conservative side of the aisle that we do wrestle with, and it speaks to the transportation issue. I think to your question about kids learning different things in different schools, I'm of the belief that it's not so much about the curriculum per se, because you can teach math. I believe there's one way to teach math, and it's the old way of learning math, the way I learned it. I was never really a fan of the Common Core style of mathematical teaching. I watched my oldest son go through that. He was frustrated with it. As a parent, I was frustrated with it because I was like, what the heck is this? It's not math. Right. That's not the way I was taught. And so there was a frustration there. I think the better way is that there has to be a standardized testing ground, where you have maybe a series of tests, not one test written by the textbook manufacturers, where you can demonstrate the knowledge of that child. So if you can demonstrate the knowledge of children, regardless of the environment, that's the best measure to see if they're rising or they're falling on the landscape of every other child or the other countries around the world that we're competing with. Mm-hmm.
My concern with standardized testing is that African Americans typically do not do well on standardized testing, so there's a whole bias and a whole conversation with that we can talk about.
And that's why I don't want to, I'm sorry, Gary, this is why I don't want you to cut you off. This is important. That's why I think that instead of having one test that is written by legislators or written by textbook manufacturers, which typically is the case, there are a series of other tests that have been existing for a long time. The Iowa Basic is one for a long time that existed. There's about 5 of them. And what you have is students in a district, in a school, in a county, in a state. They don't know which test they're taking. They just take the tests that are brought. And that helps you demonstrate their ability to comprehend and do the basic skills work that we really do need young kids to be able to perform.
Okay, let's get to our question in the audience. Miracle.
So with the alarming rate of illiteracy rising in the U.S., how has the Biden administration addressed the issue? And then how does each of your candidates plan to address the issue if elected?
I don't have a direct answer on the literacy. I don't work for the campaign, so I can't give you a direct answer on what they've done about literacy. What I can say to the previous point about whether or not we have a streamlined way, because if one kid's in a charter school or kids in public traditional schools, I think that's why we need a Department of Education that's able to analyze and do inventory about what's being done across the board. Do things need to be tweaked in the Department of Education? Probably, but scrapping it, I just don't think that that's a pathway that yields us the harvest that we want. And for black folks in particular, without these entities, a lot of times the mechanisms that we need to ensure that equity exists are not there. right? We need the mechanisms to protect us from the discrimination that we face on a consistent basis through these institutions.
Oh, no, is that Roland? Roland Martin in the building? Oh, Lord. Let's give Roland the mic. He probably got something to say. Respond.
I think with the literacy, and this is an important one, the number one way we deal with literacy in the country is kids have to be in schools. We do have to acknowledge that in some of our communities, there was 2 years where children were not in the classroom. And now the data has come out, now the information is coming out, that was more about the National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers, not the teachers, but the union leaders who were actually blocking kids going back into school. We do have a real epidemic in our country with children who have fallen behind. And if we're gonna be real about it, most of those kids happen to be black kids and Spanish kids, because they're the ones who were in these school corridors where they were locked out of the classroom through no fault of their own. I think the recipe for success going forward is you have to go to a more dynamic education system where parents are prioritized, not the system being prioritized. So if parents can look at their child and see, hey, you know what, my son's not where he needs to be, any mother, any father's gonna go get that child help. That's what we do as parents. We're gonna do that. But if we leave it in the hands of the career bureaucrats and the career administrators, and I wanna be clear, not the teachers, because it's not the teachers' fault. It's the bureaucrats, it's the administrators, and unfortunately, it is the union bosses. Those are the people who are not prioritizing our children. We need to put parents back at the head of the table when it comes to this.
Okay, so I agree with that, and I get head of the table, Congressman, but respectfully, when we say we're gonna go get that help, so when I needed to get that help to get my daughter on task, to go from the charter to the public, that help costs about $400 or $500 that I did not have. So the tutoring, the extra help, all of that, the stuff that she got for free in the public school, the tutorials was helpful. So when you say go get that help, how? Like, who's gonna pay for it? Like, at the end of the day, there should be some safety net, in the public school, don't you agree, that can give that help that you're talking about?
I'm not advocating for getting rid of public schools.
Okay.
I want to be clear on that. I do not advocate for that position. There is definitely a place for public schools in our communities. They have all the infrastructure. They have most of the kids right now. Most people aren't going to leave their traditional public schools. But you have to give parents who are looking for an ability to find something else that ability to do so. And there are states, Florida is one. I actually wrote some of the policy when I was at the state level, when we actually went to a transportation scholarship along with some of the other tax credit scholarships that we had for parents who were saying, I need to be able to transport my child, or I need other tutoring services. I personally believe if you look at Title I funding at the federal level, instead of just giving that to the State Department of Education and to local school districts where they might buy a book mobile that drives around the neighborhood or do other things within the school, give that money directly to parents. So if they need tutoring, they can go get those resources.
Okay, quick response, and we're going to go to criminal justice.
I struggle with when you talk about kids being out of school, ignoring the fact that teachers were at risk of dying. Right? Like when we talk about why people weren't in school, my mother was a public educator for 30 plus years. My father was a janitor in the public school system. So public schools produced this man right here. My issue is when we act like teachers should have been, children's immune system recovered swifter from COVID. We know that. But adults were dying by the droves. Kids were coming to school. My daughter brought my mom, who's 70-something years old, COVID, right? Now, by the grace of God, my mother survived and didn't have some of the outcomes that other people did because she's a healthy individual that takes care of herself, but that would not have been true for a lot of people. When we are making policy decisions in critical moments like that, the safety and the welfare of the people has to be the priority, because I can't educate a child that's dead. I can't have teachers teach children that are dead. So if these educators are dying by the droves, we're going to bring them out of the building, protect them, and bring them back. Now, and let's be clear, we had never faced this as a nation. So you just gonna dump all the kids in the building, let them keep getting sick, getting the old people sick, people dying. I went to way too many funerals outside. And when we listen to conservative policies, there's a thread of inhumaneness that rides through them. There's a thread of ignoring humanity that consistently rides through that for the desire to be profitable.
So this is where I got to push back, Gary, because in Florida, we actually reopened our schools faster than any other state in the country. And we have one of the oldest populations in the country.
And people died in Florida.
But hold on a second.
And a lot of people died in
Gary.
Florida.
This is important because the rate of death from COVID-19 in Florida was actually below some of the other states that had the draconian lockdowns.
Give me the amount of people that died
data.
in your state.
That's the data.
Give me the amount of people that died in your state as a result of those policies.
As a result of which policies? Reopening our schools?
Opening the economy. Georgia and Florida continued to do things that were against what is the best interest of their citizens. People died in your state, sir.
We had lower deaths than.
Give me the number of how many people died.
We had lower deaths than New York and California, and we had
a lower population.
And we had. Do you let me make my next statement? By the way, we have a larger population in the state of New York, and we had a lower death rate than California and New York,
sir.
And
Give
you
me
had
the
two
numbers.
diametrically
You're not
opposed
going to answer
policies.
my question. How many people died?
If I tell you the death rate and the absolute
not
number,
the death
then it was
rate,
lower than
how many
both.
people died in your state as a result of those policies?
Gary, I don't have all the numbers of all 50 states. It's been
Then
3.5
don't bring it up.
years. What you mean don't bring it up?
Don't bring up a
do
number that you
because
don't have the
you're
number for.
No, you are throwing out an emotional argument. And then when I tell
I'm
you
throwing out a
that the
factual
death rate-
argument. Did people die?
Anybody on social media can go Google it right now.
Did
Go
people
check out the
die?
death rate
How
in
many people
Florida,
died,
the
bro?
death rate in New York,
Roland
the
got
death
the
rate in
number.
California.
Pat, Roland, what's
Go
the
ahead.
number? Walk fast,
I like
walk
fact
fast.
checks in real time.
Yeah.
Get it.
That's what I'm saying.
Now,
Let's go.
now, Donald Trump didn't want fact checking in real time, and they
Neither did Kamala Harris, Roland. Let's acknowledge that.
Well, she fact checked him, but let me be clear.
She didn't fact check herself.
Actually, well, you know, he lied 50 times in the first debate, 30
She
times in
lied
the second
33.
debate. Here's
Go
the
ahead.
whole deal. Here's the whole deal. The reality is here. When it came to Florida, okay, what COVID exposed, first of all, Florida per capita had a higher rate, and then that was acknowledged. But here's the problem what you did not admit to. What COVID exposed was the inequities between inner city schools and suburban schools. For instance, in Montgomery, Alabama, they actually had to use school buses and turn them into hotspots because they realized the number of kids who couldn't get on the internet. It exposed the Black and Hispanic kids who didn't have laptops, who didn't have iPads. So when we went to a virtual learning system, white kids in suburban areas, or even in cities where higher income areas, they were in a better position. It exposed the inequities in the education system. So the system was grossly unprepared for it. To Gary's point, folks were dying. Black folks were dying in a significant rate. And so what COVID exposed was the problems in our system. Now, you're right, the data is there where Black and Hispanic kids in terms of where they are. Because first of all, majority of kids in public schools are Black and Hispanic. So the problem is you got largely white folks making educational decisions that don't impact their kids. So what's happening, even listen, I created school choice as the Black choice. I know this whole deal. The fundamental problem, though, that you have to admit, you got two things. Conservatives want to get rid of the teachers union because they're one of the biggest donors of the Democratic Party. That's what you got going on. I've actually sat with these folks. Then you have folks on who are progressive side who, yes, are taking advantage of a teacher position and not education of the children. So now you got to put people's motives on the table and say, why are you here? So the voucher plans in Texas and Tennessee is not about low-performing kids. It's about white suburban parents. And that's why I've opposed what's happening in Texas, because that is a voucher scam, because it's not about low-performing schools. It's allowing everybody to be able to have a voucher. And we see in Arizona what actually happened with the data. The number of people who greatly benefit from vouchers are people who already send their kids to private schools. And the private schools are not creating new seats for Black and Hispanic
Okay,
kids.
so
Only thing I'm going to say to push back on that is that the end point of what you said, Roland, there's a lot of subjective conversation in that about how it's only, hold on.
Which one?
Hold on. About how it's only for white kids. What I'm telling you is that the reason why I support vouchers or support scholarship programs is because I want to give every parent that ability to make that decision.
You want to give it, but
So I'm just
I have voted for it.
I'm just very curious.
No, I'm on the record.
I'm very curious. Do you want the folks to get vouchers who right now are in the worst performing schools, or do you want anybody to access it? Who should get it first?
Well, first of all, what I believe in is a universal system. In Florida, who got it first were kids who were in low-performing schools.
Right.
That's what we did first in
How
Florida.
how long was that program? For?
25 years.
Precisely.
Yes.
The problem in Tennessee and Texas is they wanted to be open to everybody immediately. So you don't have an opportunity to assess it. I believe if you do a voucher program, it should be for the worst performing schools and students. You can set about percentile. In Texas, that's not what they did. And in fact, it's even worse in Texas because Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, what they wanted to do was they wanted to keep 40% of the money that was supposed to go to parents and say, oh, it's a tax savings. Parents will get 60% of the money, we'll keep 40. And I'm like, well, if you care about the parents, why not get to Tezlyn's point, get the parents 100%?
I can't
Okay,
speak to Texas's plan. I'm gonna tell you Florida's plan.
So let me
That's
kind of
fine.
bring
Go
some
ahead.
consensus on
I'm
this.
sorry.
It sounds like this is a state issue. So is this why the federal government should be more involved on the federal level for the department? Because when we're talking about this is what we're doing in Florida, this is what we're doing in Texas, this is what we're doing, and so there's not consistency, which we're getting ready to get into with criminal justice. When you have these leave it at the states, now we're and by the way, I lived in Orlando, Florida, so my daughter went to school most of her time in Florida. Then when we moved to Oklahoma City, she went to the charter school, then back to Texas, and she was off chart because you have so many different states that have different rules. So I kind of want to, I'll let you
Keep
respond
the
quick.
Department of
2 minutes
Education.
literally,
I'm not
and which
even-
is why
I'm
the
not
Department of
even-
Education is important.
I'm not even going to go 2 minutes.
And then I'm going to go
real
criminal
quick.
justice.
I'm a conservative and I'm a federalist. I believe that there is a role for the federal government, but that role is limited and defined. There is a reason why you have laboratories of democracy in the 50 states, because each state has to actually go through the legislative and policy work to find the best mix.
gotta
And
respect-
then
Right.
people will
Well,
move to the best.
But we
That's
got to.
why-
But see, when you say that
the
you're-
thing is,
I don't want people to have to
Give
move
me
on
this.
But
necessarily,
see, but
that's what
then, we say people to move. It wasn't. Everybody doesn't have the resources to move. See, this
I
is where we
grant
go
that,
back
but-
to the
totally
resources.
grant
But when you give
So
states the power, and without their checks, that's how you end up with Louisiana being 34% black and having underrepresentation for the last 100 years, right? We have 34% of the state. We just got a second black majority congressional district as a result of court rulings. We had to sue to get that. That's because of voting rights being rolled back. That's because of Trump's judges. That's because of allowing things to be rolled away at the federal level and leaving it up to the states. That is a fact. That is a
That's
fact.
actually not true.
And
Okay.
that is a fact. If
I
we
know
don't
the state of
protect-
Louisiana sued, but everything you
I
said is the
live
reasons
there.
why is actually not true.
No, we sued because we didn't have the representation. Matter of fact, black people, I live in the second blackest state in America, okay? Republicans have a supermajority in the House and the Senate. Black people had 1 out of the 6 Congress members. In Louisiana, they elect 5 white congressmen every 2 years. There have only been 5 black people elected to Congress from the state of Louisiana in the history of this nation because of those type of policies. Listen to what I'm saying. 5 white people get elected from the state of Louisiana every 2 years. There have only been 2 black people to serve in Congress from the state of Louisiana in the history of this nation, because there are people like this good brother who believes that the federal government should have no say in what the
here we
states are
go.
doing as
That
it
is-
relates to our
nope,
policies.
nope, that's wrong.
Either if you're a federalist,
flat
that's what
out
you
wrong.
believe.
There are-
If you are a federalist, that's
Article
what you
1,
believe.
Section 8 of the United States Constitution actually lays out the roles of Congress and the roles of the federal government. You have to make
So
it
how do black
I'll
people?
let you go, Gary.
Black
I'll
people
let you
have
go
had
now, Gary. Now,
black
I'm
people
gonna
have had to
respond.
fight against
Gary,
that
I'll let you
Constitution.
go. I'll let
Black
you go.
people
Now,
have
now,
had
now,
to
now,
fight
speak
against the
on it.
Constitution from the inception of this nation. If you want to talk
Black
about the
people fought
Constitution,
against
the Constitution didn't even consider
racism
you
in this country.
a full human.
Women fought
The
against
Constitution
being
didn't even-
subjugated in this
you are a
country, and
federalist,
we've moved past
sir.
that, Gary.
No,
You can't ignore that.
We have not moved past that because people
Okay,
in your
hold on.
party don't want women to vote today.
Okay.
What are we talking about?
That's a fact.
Okay, so
You
let's-
see,
so
there are
let us-
people-
let us
This
respond.
is the emotional
Are
argument.
no, no,
I'm talking about
Wait,
emotion.
I may be emotional, but I am
I'm not
factual.
going to tolerate.
I
That's
may
an
be
emotional
emotional, but
argument.
I am
It is not a
factual.
policy.
So let's let-
setback.
so
I
let
may
us
be
respond.
emotional, but I am factual.
Yeah.
Your
You are
party
not
as-
factual.
Okay,
Go ahead.
so-
Were black people
So-
full citizens in the Constitution?
Do you want to have this
Were
debate?
blacks? Yes or
Let's
no?
go. So
were black people
do you want me
full
to answer?
citizens?
Do you
in
want
the-
me to answer?
Yes or no? Were black people full citizens?
Do you
in the
want me to
Constitution?
answer?
Okay, so
I'm gonna answer it right now. When the Constitution was being drafted, it was the Southern states. The
don't give me all
Gary.
that.
Hold on,
Here's the
let-
thing. Here's the
let
thing.
him-
Now,
hold on, Gary, let him
Gary just
answer
wants
it.
a yes or no. He don't want to talk about the details because the devil is in the
Oh, I can
details.
give you the
But
details.
somebody wants to go yes or
Oh,
no
let's
and not
get to
give
it
you the
then.
devil, then that's a problem.
Okay,
Now let me
so
speak to it.
let him respond.
Now let me speak to it. When the Constitution was being written, the Southern states did not, obviously, because black slaves were not allowed to vote, they wanted to count every slave as a whole person. And the reason is because the Southern states wanted more congressional seats in Congress to control the federal government. The Northern states, the non-slaves.
While they were enslaved.
Are you going to let me finish or are you going to answer for me? Let me finish. The non-slave states said, no, you cannot count black slaves in terms of apportionment because they are not allowed to vote. You're not going to give them an opportunity to be represented in the federal Congress. The compromise was a 3/5 compromise, but it was because the southern states wanted to use a black body to get more power, but not give the black body an opportunity to determine its own destiny. It was the northern states that didn't want black people to be subjugated even more at the writing of our United States Constitution. That's the devil in the details that nobody likes to talk about.
Let's be clear that when slavery ended in my state, the second blackest state in America, we put a black man in the governor's mansion in Louisiana. Okay, he was the president of the Senate, then the lieutenant governor, and he became the governor of Louisiana. Because a black man fresh off the plantation in 1872 becomes the governor of Louisiana, comes in all of these restrictive laws that made sure that black people did not have the right to vote in southern states, in deeply southern states. When you talk about what has impacted us, it is I personally am the 4 generations ago, my great-grandfather was a man named Philman Thomas. He was a congressman in the 2nd Congressional District. He owned my great-grandmother, who then produced my lineage in this family. So don't tell me what exists in this country. I still live in the full understanding that if I were able to grab all of the things that came from my history, having a grandfather that was a member of Congress, I'd probably be in Congress today. But you can't talk about all of the nuances of our lives and our history because it's written away by the myth and the lies that people like you tell.
First of all, the only thing that I'm bringing to this entire debate today is to be focused on the policy of what's going to happen in this election and going forward. We can talk about the history if you want to. I'm more than happy to do that. But let's be very clear.
History does impact reality, though.
Hold on, but let's be very clear, because I said it earlier. In 44 days, this conversation, whatever Donald Trump says, whatever Kamala Harris says, all those points go away. What's going to happen after that election are the policies that are going to impact black people, white people, Hispanic
Let me
people
say
in the
why that
United
matters.
States.
Let me say why that matters.
They're not going to get to the next topic, y'all.
The history matters. The history matters because if you don't have the context, you don't understand why and how we got here. You don't understand how we're still being restricted of having equal representation. If I'm telling you that right now I live in a state that does not have fair representation, that there's a supermajority in the legislature that is Republican right now in Louisiana, when black people make up 34% of the population and we cannot have fair representation, that is because of people who believe in federalist ideology.
No, that's black people's fault.
So we're going
That
to
is not black people's fault.
We're going
They
to the
don't
next.
get out and vote.
Hold on,
That's our
excuse me.
fault.
We're going to the next topic.
Even,
Hold on.
wait
a minute.
I gotta address that, Tez.
Wait a minute.
Even if black people voted, even if we voted, there are not enough seats allocated to us to have fair representation.
Okay.
Here's all thing I'm going to say.
That's a lie.
Only thing I'm going to say is, I'm going to give it back to Tez. We disagree on some of this stuff, not the history. I think we mostly agree on the history, but we disagree on some of the outcomes going forward. But I think it's important because we don't have that much time left.
Right.
Let's give it back to Tez. Let's see where she wants to take us.
Let's go to the next one.
You
This is
lied,
why we
sister.
need this show to be one topic so we can really unpack it. There's so many layers in politics. I want to add something quickly on criminal justice reform. Since 2020, we only got about 6 minutes, guys. Over 1,000 black people have been killed by police. What reforms do you think, again, this is a big question, and I know we can't answer it all, but what reforms do you think can change the game to make sure that cops are held accountable? And my question is, Donald Trump has talked about ending qualified immunity on the federal level. Do you support that, and why?
Well, a couple things. One, I think there were competing bills in the United States Senate I believe it was the summer of 2020. There were competing bills. There was the Tim Scott version of the legislation, and there was and I forget I think it was the George Floyd policing bill.
Justice and Policing.
The Justice and Policing bill, that was the other one. The two bills were actually quite similar. The one major difference between the two pieces of legislation was qualified immunity.
That's a big difference.
In the Tim Scott's bill said you can't get rid of qualified immunity. I agree, you cannot get rid of qualified immunity. If you get rid of qualified immunity, I'm telling you today, you will have less police officers on the street. We have a ton of black officers who serve in our police departments, Hispanic police officers, white police officers. When you get rid of qualified immunity, what happens is that police officer is not just subject criminally, but also subject financially. Hold on, so what officer is gonna sign up when you deal with, at a minimum, any one officer has what?
Maybe a
10,000
maybe a
interactions
non-racist,
with a
not
person?
maybe a non-racist one. Now, I just want to say,
so I don't think you should get rid of qualified
okay,
immunity.
and let
That
him
was the
respond. We only
difference.
got 5 minutes. I would love to come back, Congressman, and have this conversation. I actually am the senior advisor for the George Floyd family. I was there when they wrote that, so I definitely want to talk about that in full detail. On
Let me
qualified immunity.
say,
But let him respond.
I was one of the lead organizers for activities that took place in Baton Rouge when Alton Sterling was killed by the police. I could tell you last year, in the last 2 years, over 1,000 black people were strip searched by the Baton Rouge Police Department unjustly. That a federal judge ruled that the strip search policy of the Baton Rouge Police Department this year ruled this, that it was unconstitutional. And that I could tell you the names of countless other black people who have been wronged by the police. If we end qualified immunity, we can hold them accountable. And what does that mean? That means that a cop who kills you is held accountable, not just by the insurance of the city, but by his personal stuff, that you can go after him personally when he kills you. You know what that's gonna do? That's gonna stop cops from killing people.
That's right.
Because if I can get your insurance, if I can get your house, if I can take your stuff when you kill us, you're gonna think before you pull that trigger. And instead of protecting dirty cops, I'm not bad at good cops. I want a cop to go home to his family at night. I want you to go home to your family at night. But when you have a bad cop, when you have a bad apple, the end of the quote is they spoil the bunch. How do you get them out of the bunch? You ensure that the people who are harmed by them have all of the mechanisms and tools available to them to hold them accountable. And qualified immunity means that that cop is only held accountable by the city. Meaning, if I go out and shoot you, the city's liable for my decisions, not me. That means my wife, matter of fact, when a cop in Louisiana killed Ronald Green, when he thought that he was going to lose his job and his retirement, you know what he did? He took his car and ran it into a tree and killed himself so his wife could keep his insurance. Mm-hmm. So if I take away qualified immunity, I'd rather that bastard run into a tree than kill somebody else.
Woo. Okay, so closing thoughts. We have a major election coming up. I think we have understood that state politics is very important. That's one of the things I'm always talking about. We talk federal, Trump, Harris, Trump, Harris, but it's important that we also talk about it on the state level. Can you give me closing thoughts in maybe about a minute or so, and Gary, on what people need to be looking at? What should they be looking at? What's most important in this upcoming election?
Well, look, when it comes to the presidential election, there are 3 things that are massively important. Who's going to do a great job running this economy and making sure people can thrive? Who's actually going to secure the southern border? Because there's been 15 million people that have come into our country illegally. And who's actually going to get us out of these conflicts across the globe? No matter how you feel personally, when Donald Trump was president of the United States, we were getting out of foreign conflicts. We were not engaged in other wars. Vladimir Putin was not looking to take property or take other countries because, quite frankly, he wasn't going to mess with Donald Trump. When he was president, the southern border was secured. That is a fact. And number 3, when he was president, the economy was significantly better than it is right now. That is a fact. Conversely, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris comes in. Vladimir Putin has invaded Ukraine. Israel was attacked on October 7th. Our enemies do not respect them and do not fear them. And that's the actual truth. The southern border will remain wide open. Instead of 15 million illegals, it'll be 30. Because the Senate bill, by the way, that she said she would sign into law, that would make it legal to have 1.8 million people come into the country illegal every single year before the president is allowed to act under the law. That's why the Senate bill was trash anyway. So I will ask people, just look at the actual policies, because like I said through this entire debate, the debate and the conversations and the personalities and the emotions will end. The policy is what remains.
Okay, closing thoughts, Gary.
I can't list all of the things that Donald Trump did that were detrimental to black people. But I can tell you that if you go to Gary Chambers Jr. on social media, there's a post where I have 15 rulings where he's appointed judges and the impact that they have on you. When you talk about what does VP Harris offer you, she offers you a plan that's clear about what she's going to do to impact your life, working class people's lives. You don't need to fall in love with politicians. That's one of the main problems that we have. We want to like and love the people that we vote for. You may not like her, you may not think she's the best thing since sliced bread, but read the policies and ask, do those policies impact your life, and how will it make your life better? And talk to your cousins. There's a false narrative that my good brother and others try to carry out there, that black men are going to the other side. 80+% of black men have voted on the right side protecting their humanity, protecting their pockets, and advancing their communities. Black people cannot put our humanity on the shelf for our pocketbook because they will kill you on the street like a dog, and then you're going to call somebody like me to help get you justice. So the question is, listen to the people who fight for you every day. The good congressman represents a district that's majority white, but he tries to tell black people what to do. Y'all have a good evening.
Ooh, well, that's been Tez on 10. Give a round of applause for Congressman Donalds
That was
and
lame.
Gary Chambers. I hope, well, hey, that was his closing thoughts. I hope that you guys make sure.
What does
Is
that
the
matter?
district majority white? I mean, that is, he's asking, is it?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
So
That
what does
matters.
matter?
So
it
he got
doesn't.
white people to elect him and came to tell you what to do.
Oh my gosh.
All right,
Okay.
guys.
That talking point doesn't mean a damn thing. We all know that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you can't make money and pass on generational wealth.
I
does
make
it?
money, and I'm passing on generational wealth.
If you can't pass on generational wealth overall, does that matter what you just said? No, it does not.
It does matter.
No, I mean, come on, stop, man. Bro, we had a good
I do think- listen, I think that the facts
we had a
matter.
good conversation. We had a good conversation. I really appreciate
I do.
having that
I
conversation
respect
with
you.
you. Tez, I appreciate you doing this and letting this happen.
Yeah.
Would love to come back and do it again.
Absolutely. This is important, guys, what we're doing. Revolt News. Not a lot of networks are doing this, taking a chance to have different points of view, and importantly with black men. I think that's also important too. We have a lot of panels with black women, but I really wanted a panel with black men. I thank you both for coming out. Y'all give a round of applause for Tez on 10.